In this session, I'd like to look at combining the three modes we've learnt about so far and get you applying your knowledge of modes and their chords to better understand a common chord sequence in all styles of music, something musicians call a 2-5-1. So, it's on with the theory hats for this one, but stick with it as I guarantee you'll come out the other side having learnt a lot of new terminology and how different types of chord and scales work together. To date, you hopefully have a good understanding of the modes of Ionian, which remember is just another name for the major scale, Dorian, and more recently the Mixolydian mode. Staying within the key of C major and looking at the modes of the C major scale, the sound and character of each of these three modes can of course be represented by a chord. C Ionian or the C major scale can be represented by using a C major 7th chord. D Dorian can be represented using a D minor 7th chord, and G Mixolydian can be represented using the chord of G7. Okay, these three different chord types are in essence the building blocks of creating a 2-5-1 chord sequence. And if you understand each chord type and the modes associated with them, then I guarantee that navigating and making use of a 2-5-1 chord sequence in music will be an absolute breeze. But before we continue any further, I'd just like to look more closely at the construction of our G7 chord and how it actually functions in music. I like to think of these dominant 7th chords as sounding a little unstable. Unlike the defined and stable sounds of our major and minor chords that we've encountered so far, a dominant 7th chord, in this case G7, sounds as if it always wants to go somewhere. Just have a listen to this chord played on the piano, and hopefully you may be able to hear where it wants to move. The reason for this instability or need for harmonic progression is due to an interval contained within every dominant 7th chord out there. It's the interval between the major 3rd, in this case the note of B, and the flattened 7th, which is an F. This interval in music is what's called a tritone, named simply because the physical space between the two notes is the distance of 3 whole tones, 1, 2, and 3, hence the term tritone. If we look at the relationship between the B and the F on the fingerboard like this, and using terms that we're more familiar with, hopefully you can see that they create the interval of a flattened 5th. See, a perfect 5th up from the B is found like this, and flattening the 5th, or moving the note down by a fret, gives us the note of F, or a flattened 5th. In music history, this interval of a flattened 5th or tritone was frowned upon by the people of the church, and during the 18th century was referred to as something called Diabolus in musica, or the devil in music. Now, thankfully these far-fetched beliefs are firmly in the past, although even today this interval still continues to suggest a scary or evil sound, and I personally absolutely love the character and mood it possesses, and make use of it in the music I write. So going back to the G7 chord played on the piano, hopefully you can hear it wanting to move here, which is the chord of C major. Now, in music we use the term resolve or resolution to describe this harmonic movement between chords. So we can now say that the chord of G7 wants to resolve to a C major chord. Now, the reason behind this is that the tritone contained in our G7 chord, the notes of B and F, resolve outwards. The B wanting to resolve up to a C, and the F wanting to resolve down to an E. Watch again and notice this resolution of the tritone as I go from a G7 chord to a C major chord. Of course, I could extend our C major chord to a C major 7th chord, but importantly our G7 chord would still function in exactly the same way, always wanting to gravitate towards a major chord.